Okay, so hello again guys, and we're gonna continue on with the second part of the AMG setup at Watkins. Now there was a couple of questions that were asked both over on our forum and also in the comments, and I believe I addressed the question about tyre pressures in the comments, but I will also cover that once more. Especially now I've also done a full 10 lap run as I would normally do, so I can show you guys both in iRacing and in MoTeC a better example of how the tyre pressures build over the run and how they stabilize. And this should also get across the point as to why it is important to do a 10 lap run rather than doing just those quick 3 lap runs that we were doing the other day. One other thing I would also like to note is that I actually do all these videos in one take. I don't do any post editing at all, so please bear with me for mistakes. And yeah, okay, so I'll just hop over into iRacing here. Okay, so we're back with the setup that we created last time. As you guys can see, it's all the same as it was. Spring set 2. Cambers as they were before, minus 2.2 at the front and minus 1.7 at the rear. Full fuel as always, although this is something I actually didn't touch on in the last video, but you are going to want to be wary of this one. If you intend to do full hour runs, as is pretty common with a GT3 car, so like you would do in the Endurance series and any other hosted series that exists, you should be aware of where the tank is located in the car. And the reason I say this is because carrying around 120 litres of fuel is not an inconsiderable mass. I think, this is off the top of my head, the density of 1 litre of fuel is approximately something like 0.85 kilograms per litre. So if you think you're carrying almost 100 kilos extra on the car there, which you don't really want to be doing in terms of a performance gain, if you will, but you have to do it because otherwise you wouldn't last the distance, if you will. It's also obviously why you go a lot quicker in qualifying, because you got less mass on the car. But the thing that's really important about it is, depending upon where the fuel is stored in the car, so say it's stored at the front or stored at the rear, or it's best if it's stored in the middle of the car, because the closer the fuel tank is to the center of gravity of the car, the less the balance is going to change over the run. Which is why if you're doing bespoke cars, like the F1 guys, they all try and put their fuel tanks pretty much as close as they can get to prevent this balance shift happening. But there are some cars which this is particularly noticeable on, and one car which is a great car to go and understand the effect because it has a nose weight indicator. Well, actually two cars, thinking about it. The one where I actually thought, wow, this would actually be quite a good idea to show you is if you go to the Sprint Cup NASCARs, they have a nose weight indicator along with nose ballast that you can move forwards and backwards. And I think the difference I noticed was I normally run 52% nose weight in those cars, and I think when I took all the fuel out down from 18 gallons down to 2 or something like that, the nose weight shifted forward about 2%, so I was getting like 54% nose weight. Now that will make a considerable difference to how your car handles, so you really should be aware of that. And one series this really caught us out in was the Blank Pan Endurance Pro series qualifying. We could never get the rough roof, however you want to pronounce it, to actually be reasonably competitive in the qualifying runs. And thinking about it now, I strongly suspect that was because we would take our race set and we would just basically drain it of fuel. The front end would come up at least about 5 or 6 millimeters, I think, which is a reasonable difference. And the car just handled terribly. It was always so bad in qualifying, and it never really reflected how good we'd got the car set for the race. So it is important to be aware of, and it's going to make a difference on how your car drives. So just be mindful of that. Anyway, there was a couple of other things that I didn't fully touch on in the last video, which I'm going to complete in this video. The first of which was the tyre pressures. Second, we're going to talk a bit more about ride heights and rake. Thirdly, we're going to talk about dampers, and fourth and finally, I'm going to touch on the this option here with the bump rubbers, and I'm going to kind of do a sort of an overview as to why there might be a reason behind running with none, although I haven't tried it yet, so we'll kind of be learning at the same time. So it should be interesting, maybe with some rather amusing results. But anyway, let me just show you this here. Okay, so if we look on the left, we've got our lap chart in terms of times. Now, if you remember, we were down in the 109s by the end of the last session. Now, just bear with me, sort of, whilst I get back up to speed. I haven't driven the car since that last video, and it takes me a while to get used to it. But as you can see, this is the start of our 10-lap run. We started on lap 3. I actually crashed in the first one, so I had to start again. But as you can see, we're down on 10-0, 10-2, 10-1, 10-1, 10-1, 10-0, 10-4. There was a mistake on that lap. 10-1, 10-2, 10-3. What I'd like to note about this is, if you would exclude the 10-4 and probably the end 10-3, both laps where I had a couple of errors, is the consistency of the laps is pretty important. If you're all over the place, like and I'm talking like half second to a second variance or even more, you're not realistically going to be able to ascertain if your setup changes really make a difference. You need to be running consistently so that you can actually understand if the changes you're making are helping the car, hindering the car, or other. And the longer you run, I mean, the ideal is you run as much fuel as you intend to run in the race you're going to run in, because that will give you that will show you how the car handles basically any point in the race and on any sort of tyre wear and so on and so on. Okay, so I'm going to go into the garage and I'm going to talk a little bit about tyre pressures. There was a comment in the comments that was related to where I mentioned that if you increase the pressures too far, then you end up with tyres which basically become just sliding all over the track and too hot. Hopefully I'm going to be able to do a demonstration of that in a second, but I thought I'd touch on this first. In the last video I mentioned I normally aim between 175 and 185. I had a sort of look around at what other guys were doing, and a lot of other guys were saying they were aiming for 185. So as you can see on this, we have the left front is at 185, left rear 183, the right front 179, the right rear 179 as well. Now if you look, they all started at 162 as we set them in the last video. And the reason why the right sides are lower is entirely down to the layout of Watkins and the fact that there is more high speed, high load right hand corners than there are lefts. So it's as the weight transfers to the outside wheels in a corner, it's just stressing the lefts more. It's getting them harder. They're building pressure more. So to compensate for this difference, and also because if we are going to take 185 as our target, I'm just going to bump up the right sides, sorry, by 3 kPa each. Now, yes, that's going to only take me to 182, but I do like to do these as sort of a step at a time. So if it did take me to 182 and it gave me space for another 3 on top, I would try that. But if you notice, the adjustment goes from 165 to 169, so that's going to put us 4, and I would always prefer to be under rather than over my target. And the reason for that is because, as myself and a couple of other guys that I run with have found, is that pretty much if you're under, you'll get the tires a bit harder and they won't last quite as long, but it's not a huge deal. Whereas if you get them over and they overinflate, you're sliding around all over the place, and it's basically horrible to drive. So I always prefer to be under rather than over. Now the other thing to note about this is, as if the tyre ends up at a higher pressure, you're effectively building stagger into the car, and you're also going to be staggering the ride heights. So if the lefts are at 185 and the rights are at 179, then the left side's going to be higher than the rights for the most of that run. Now the thing is, that's not necessarily a huge deal, but we're starting to come into the effects of crossweight and things like that here. Now normally, and sort of as a baseline, I would suggest strongly that everyone starts with 50 crossweight. But what I would say is, if you are willing to try other than 50% crossweight, say you've got a track which is heavily right-hander based, so I mean Watkins might be a track that you would say that on, or somewhere like Lime Rock Park, because every corner on Lime Rock bar 1 is a right-hander. So if you can pretty much wrestle your car through the left, then you'll maybe be able to get an advantage by having more cross in the car. But okay, let's move on to something else here. Well, let's move back to the tyre pressures actually. I'd just like to show you something in MoTeC to illustrate why it's important to do 10-lap runs. We can see in the garage screen that the tyres are up to 185, 179. And we're just sort of assuming that after 10 laps this is kind of stable. But let's just drop out here and go and look at MoTeC for a second. Okay, so if we just make it so that all the data is included in the run rather than just a single lap, we can see how the tyre pressures build and the variance over the lap. What I'm going to try here is I'm going to try and keep pretty much when talking about the tyres, I'm trying to keep the red lines are for right sides and lilac lines are for left sides, so that you guys have a bit better of an understanding. Now, what we can also note from this is that the car was fastest on lap 6. Now, I made a mistake on lap 7, but I probably would agree that the car was probably at its best on lap 6. So this is a possible way of deciding what tyre pressures you like in the car. And what I mean by that is, if you liked how it handled on a particular lap, then you can go and look at what tyre pressures were on that lap, and then maybe that's what you want your target to be. It's important to then verify that with regards to wear, because like lower pressures might give you more grip, but they also might wear the tyres out too quick for the end of a long run, and you might be in trouble, you might get them too hot, etc. But if we look on this, we can see that the front left was at 184 and the rear left was at 182. But what we can also see is that the front right and the rear right were at 177 and 178. But this wasn't where they stopped. They continued to build pretty much up to lap 9 and 10. I'd say lap 9 and 10 are close enough to be considered that they're almost stable. But this is why I'm saying that you really want to run long runs to understand where your sort of equilibrium point is with regards to tyre pressures. Because if you consider what we were doing before, we were doing 3-lap runs, right? So if you can see where the blue line, where I'm dragging the cursor is, effectively when we were looking at the tyre pressures, we were looking at them at this point here. Okay, so the big disadvantage with this is, as you can see, at this point we had 180 on the front left, 179 on the rear left, 170, 175 and 174 on the right sides. Now, if you then compare that to where they were on lap 9, we've got we're looking at a 5 kPa difference almost on the rights, and a 10. No, sorry, we're not. We're looking at a 5 on both effectively. Now that's quite a big difference, really, and that's going to be something you're going to want to look at and predict. Especially, well, I say predict. Really, you should just only look at your tire pressures after 10 laps. You shouldn't really be looking at them after any earlier than that. Obviously, the longer the course is, the longer the tires have to get up to temperature and up to pressure as well. So you can reduce this based on the course length. So somewhere like Spa, you would definitely be able to say the tires were at equilibrium long before the 10th lap. But likewise, say if you were running, I don't know, short ovals at Bristol, you're definitely going to want to run more than 10 laps. So just you really, if you can learn how to use MoTeC, and it's not too difficult really. It's just basically graph plotting and understanding the graphs. Then I would encourage you to do that. But all I wanted to show here was the importance of doing full 10 lap runs. Okay, so if we just head back into iRacing here. Okay, so then the next thing I was going to talk about was going to be ride height. Okay, well, ride height and rake. I already said in the previous video that I like to set the front as low as possible, and the main reason for this is that that's good in terms of aerodynamics, and it's good in terms of your center of gravity height with the car. Basically, the lower you can get the center of gravity on a car, the less load transfer you're going to have to your outside tires, and the more you can use the inside tires in the turn. Now this is important because with application of vertical loading to a tire, you don't get a linear response from them. And what I mean by this is, say you apply 100 kilos to the top of a tire, and you measure that you get, I don't know, 100 kilos of lateral force in response from that. That doesn't mean that then if you apply 200 kilos to the top of the tire vertically, you're going to get 200 kilos laterally back. In actual, you'll get an exaggerated example. You would get 160 kilos of lateral loading. So this is why it's important to get the front, well, to get the center of gravity low from a design point, and also from, if you can, you should get it as low as possible. I did mention that some cars have some weird things happening where this isn't what you want, but for most cars this is definitely true. At the rear of the car is a similar kind of story, but I normally treat the rear of the car as a balance aid. So as you can see, the difference between the front ride height and the rear ride height is 8 millimeters. So I'm just going to run a couple of laps with that. And essentially what I'm trying to do here is just to give you a handle on how the car's reacting, and then after that I'm going to talk about what other rake adjustment, well, what rear ride height adjustments you might want to try out. Also, as a side note, in the last video I mentioned that I didn't actually know where the ideal shift points on this car were. Now, I went over to the iRacing forum, and there's a guy on there who has actually gone and found what the ideal ones are using, I think he either used Atlas or MoTeC. Now, you don't have to do that because thankfully he's actually posted that information. So I'll put a link through to that post in the description that you guys can check out. But essentially I wanted to be shifting a lot earlier than I was. As before, I'm just going to be doing 3 lap runs, and yes, we're not going to be looking at any tyre pressures for the reasons I've already mentioned. 3 laps is good enough to give us an idea of our on ride height changes. Also, I'm thinking of running some shorter videos which are going to focus solely on pretty much the explanation of what the adjustments do in their own right, and how they affect other, not adjustments, but car parameters, if you will. And if anyone has any suggestions on what you would really like to see from that, I'm happy to sort that out. But I have a real hate for quick adjustment tables, because I don't think they explain what's actually happening with the car effectively. And so what I want to kind of get to is I want to show you guys what the adjustment does, how that interacts with other adjustments, and how that's going to affect the car overall. And I'll try and use some pictorial sort of aids to help you guys out, because I understand that just pretty much saying to you, oh well, you change this and this happens, is quite abstract unless you can see it. Well, if you're like me, unless you can see it, it becomes difficult for you to understand. I'm also driving pretty badly since I started the video, I've noticed. Yeah, I'm still not entirely happy with how it is on the brakes through there. As you can see by the sort of tendency to over-rotate on entry. And I appear to have lost all skill in driving the car, which pretty much makes this 3-lap run a bust, but I have at least the previous data to fall back upon. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up once I pass the DRS marker as usual. Although I will be honest and say that that data there is probably worthless. I mean, the laps were all over the place, and I obviously went off on that last one. Yeah, as you can see, they're really. It is a good example, though, of how you can class this as being pretty erroneous. It's not a representative run of the car, because there's just too big a spread. And I mean, even if we go and look at the garage screen, we're not really going to see anything useful, if I'm honest with you. But anyway, okay. So that's the car with 8 mils of rake in it. Now, basically what rake is the difference between the rear ride height and the front ride height. So what you can do with this is you can use it to both change the mechanical balance and the aero balance of the car. The way the simplest way to express how it changes the aero balance is if you imagine the car as a wing. Now, if you incline that wing towards the ground, then you're effectively adding an angle of attack to it, which is effectively what you're doing with the car. And in doing so, what you're trying to do is you're basically trying to get a bit more downforce from the car, along with it can also help to reduce the drag, which sounds a bit strange, but essentially what you definitely want to avoid is you definitely want to avoid a nose up attitude of the car. You don't want the front to be higher than the rear, because if the front's higher than the rear, then you're acting almost exactly like an aeroplane wing, in the sense of you'll get air going under the car, which will basically make the front not want to turn at high speed, and you'll have more drag, and you basically won't get any benefit for it. Now, you can, if you're raising the rear, and we have an absolutely huge wing on the back of this car, as you can see here. So if you raise that rear up, you're gonna raise that wing up into the air as well. So that's gonna be exposed more to the oncoming air, which has the potential to give you more downforce, but it definitely has the potential to give you more drag as well, because you're going to increase, if you go to a sort of an insane level, you're going to increase the frontal area of the car, and that's definitely going to bring about more drag. So if I go back to some data that we previously had from the previous run, I also plot what the rake is, and we'll be able to show you that there. Some damper information that we'll get to later. Okay, so on here we can see there's a couple of channels. I've made this rake channel much larger on the graph than all the others, basically so that it's more obvious in the video. What you can tell here is, if you're looking at it over a huge range of laps, it's basically impossible to read. So I would say look at it over a single lap, which makes it much more tolerable, but still there's a lot of noise on here, so it's still difficult for you to read. Now, I'm going to apply a pretty aggressive filter here, and if I'm applying a 1 Hz filter, I am losing a lot of information, but I'm doing this to basically make it pretty clear to you what's happening. Now, 1 Hz effectively means I'm averaging all the data over a second, so that's pretty bad as data goes, especially when you want to be logging like shock data at like 100 Hz plus and things like that. As you can see, all the noise pretty much instantly disappears, but we lose a lot in the process. But given that all I want to talk about really is the rake on the straights, it's good enough for us. Okay, so if we look at the map at the top, if you guys can see that, and then say we click sort of halfway along, now we can see that our rake is 3.35 millimeters. So that means that the rear of the car is 3.35 millimeters higher than the front. I do also have a quick image here, which I think can show you guys how. Okay, so yeah, this is pretty much showing you what I'm talking about when I'm saying rake. And yes, this is in terms of angle, but so would the car be. It's just we're using the Rideheight tool to basically sort of interpolate how that affects the rake angle of the car, because that's really what you're changing here. But we're just expressing the rake as in the difference in front and rear ride heights, or rear and front, because we do rear minus front. So as you can see, we're basically setting the rear higher, and you can see how that would increase the frontal area of the car if you bring this wing higher up, and you're also going to get more air over that as well if you can get it significantly higher. You're also going to get the front of the car closer to the ground as well, which is good for cars which have which are very heavily splitter dependent. So a car which is very dependent upon this is the Daytona prototype. I always try and get the front end of that car as low to the ground as I possibly can, because the lower I can get the splitter on that car, the more front end grip I get, and the better the car goes. because the only adjustment on that car that you have is the front dive planes in terms of front aero balance. But if you go and look at the aero calculator on that car in the garage screen, you can see that as you reduce the front height, and especially as you get to the very bottom end of the front height adjustment, this isn't adjustment, by the way, this is just a calculator, but it shows you how getting the front lower to the ground is gonna increase the splitter efficiency and give you more front downforce, and it makes a huge difference. I think at Kota I dropped that splitter about 5 millimeters close to the ground, and I picked up pretty much 3 or 4 tenths in terms of lap time. So on some cars it can make an enormous difference, but on other cars it won't. Like cars like the Mustang. I'll run both the front and the rear as low as I can get them, and that's from a mechanical point of view to get the center of gravity of the car as low as I can get, because the thing has just no aero. It has a wing on it, but the wing doesn't do anything. Anyway, we'll get back to what our rake is showing in MoTeC here. So we can see our rake is 3 millimeters. Now, as I said, you never want a positive. Well, I say a positive. You never want a nose up attitude of the car. So in order to avoid that, what we're gonna, well, not avoid that because we're already avoiding it, but to see the difference that rake will give us, I'm going to bring the rear height to 95 millimeters, which is quite a coarse adjustment, but it should help in understanding. As you can see, that's also brought the front up, and it's important to set that back to what it was. Can I go one click more? Yes, apparently I can. Okay, the other thing to note on this is the cambers at the front and the rear of the car have changed. We've raised the rear up and we've lowered the front. Now, depending upon where the measurements are taken for these ride heights, will dictate pretty much how much you can get away with. And now that sounds kind of strange, but essentially if the ride heights on the front are measured behind the wheel, then that means that the front axle, well, the effective front axle height and the splitter at the front of the car have both got lower, which is probably why, despite the fact that we've got the same ride height almost here, we've seen a camber change from 2.2 to 2.3. Now, to get some accurate results, we want to change that back to 2.2. Pretty sure my caster changed as well, so I'm just going to quickly save that as baseline 2 and load up the previous baseline to check. Yeah, okay, so I had 2.2, 10.5 and 1.7, and I had 0.3 mil toe and 0.1 mil toe. So now if I load baseline 2, I need to bring my caster back up. The one thing I would say is that it is a nightmare having to keep chasing the adjustments around. And it can become quite irritating. As is seen here by me basically chasing 10.5 and 2.3 over and over. Okay, to me the camber is more important than the caster. So if we can get that to come out as... Okay, I'm literally just chasing it around now. Okay, let's keep it as that, 10.4 and 2.2. Now the toe has gone up a very slight amount, but that is important because even that slight difference might matter. We can also see the rear is saying 1.6, so we'll go up to 1.7 on that. Okay, so now we've got 82 and 95. Whilst I'm here, I'm going to make the point of, let's just see what happens if I reduce the fuel level all the way down to, I don't know, let's say we're going to go for a qualifying run, which apparently is going to take a long time because the fuel adjustment is in 1 litre increments. Okay, so as you can see, on this car, it actually hasn't really made a huge change. It's made enough of a change to comment on. For example, you can see the front ride height has gone up by 1mm and the rear ride height has gone up by 3. Now, what you can deduce from that is you can deduce that the fuel tank is further rearward than it is forwards, which, to be honest, is kind of obvious in this car. It's going to be in the back. But the other important thing to notice is to notice how the adjustments have changed. The front toe hasn't changed at all, and the caster at the front has changed. It's reduced, which in my opinion is a good thing. But the rear is more important. The camera at the rear hasn't changed, which is a little bit surprising for most. But what is important is that the toe has increased. The toe in has increased. Now, I like that. I think that's a good thing, in the sense that if as the fuel load decreases, the toe in increases as the back rises up, it's going to hopefully mean that the car becomes more stable rather than less stable. If the opposite happens, then it's normally quite prudent to add more original toe. Okay, that actually hasn't changed though, which is intriguing, because I'm pretty sure I had it at 0.4. Maybe I had it at 0.7, I don't know. Either way, it's good that it hasn't changed, or that it's changed in a direction that's helpful to us. What's normally bad is if if, say, it goes to negative toe. Because if it goes to negative toe, like say minus 0.8, it's gonna reduce rear stability, which is something you really don't want, especially not when you've got worn tires in the car. Okay, so we're going to try this out. Now we've got 13mm of rake, and we're going to see the difference that makes. It has occurred to me that it may be prudent for me to actually check on some or a lot of the things that I'm saying in terms of adjustments before I actually start the videos, but I do like if it shows something that, one, I'm either not expecting, or something that pretty much lets me sort of learn along as I'm making the video. The first reason is it shows that I'm not infallible to making mistakes and whatnot, so don't basically assume that I know everything, because I most certainly do not. And secondly, if I can show how I learn and how my thought process works, it can hopefully help out you guys. Should I ever get onto doing any oval setups, that's probably going to be quite amusing to watch. Okay, so I never really said what I would be expecting in terms of making this rear rake adjustment. Now I have put the wing higher, and I have sort of tilted the car forward if you were to look at it in the side view. Now what this has probably done is it probably increased my front area slightly, which is going to increase the drag. But hopefully, what it's also done is hopefully it's brought that front end slightly closer to the ground and given me a bit more downforce in corners like the carousel. Now that is an adjustment that you can use on cars which don't have any kind of front aero adjustment. Basically, the more rake that you crank into them, the closer you're going to get that splitter to the ground, and hopefully the better it's going to work. A side note of that is that mechanically you're raising the rear, which is going to make the rear slightly more unstable. So you might actually want to put more wing on the car. Just realised I should actually be logging some telemetry here, so that we can actually look at that. it appears that I'm getting back into the swing of driving the car at least. A lot of push through that turn there, which may be related to the fact I've got the wing more into the air. We're definitely going slower down the straight, I think. Okay, well that's the end of our 3-lap run. I think I either marginally went faster or I wasn't far off going faster than my fastest lap. And on the 3rd lap here, I was pretty happy with the car. Okay. Let's have a quick look. Oh, I was slightly off, but I was happy with how it's handling. You can see the consistency is starting to come back now too, so that's good. I'll just save that real quick. Okay, so one thing I have just noticed really quickly here is that we appear to be wearing the inside edge of the front tires slightly more than the middles. So I may be tempted to reduce the camber on those very slightly. But I'm going to leave it for now because there's a couple of other things I want to talk about first. The first one is going to be that if I now exit out and if I show you guys, okay, so this was our first run, right? Now if I load in our latest run, right? Okay, so if I take this run and I overlay it. Okay, there we go. See, that's great. That's actually worked exactly as I hoped it would. If you look, the pink line here is what we were running originally with the 3mm rake, and the black line here is what we're running now. So if we take a look at what we're at the very end of the straight here. Okay. Yep. Okay, so throttle position. This is a great tool, by the way, if you're intending to, if you want to do direct comparisons. Something that you might want to plot is, say, a lateral G indicator or a graph of lateral G. And what you could use that for is, say for example, you made an aerodynamic change, and if you overlaid your new over your old, even though the lap time might not show it, what you might find is say you're able to hold a higher speed in a turn, so say like the carousel or something, or say you're able to hold a like a higher lateral G, which would effectively be the same as going a higher speed in a turn, and conversely you'll be able to see if you're going slower at the end of a straight, and you'll also be able to see if that offsets the gain of what you've done. So, say for example here we can see that as we're coming down the straight on both laps, the original 3mm rake was giving us 255 kilometers an hour, and the overlay, which is our new rake level as it were, is giving us 254 kilometers an hour. So we lost a fraction of speed, Now let's take a quick look at where we are in the carousel. So I'm going to take a look at the carousel exit speeds, because for me that's kind of more important. Right, okay. So I just wind it back. What I want to see is I want to see who got on the throttle earlier. Well, I know I did, but obviously because it's me doing both. Right. Okay, so if we look here, this is if you guys can see this indicator, we've got a graph of we've got a bar of throttle position, right? Okay, so what we can see is the black is our new rake level and the green is our old rake level. What you can see is we got into the throttle earlier with the higher rake, and whilst at that current moment in the corner we're doing 152 compared with 153, if we then extrapolate around to the point where we can consider that we've come off the corner, I mean, it's very, very close. Like, we're carrying 1 kilometer an hour more, and then we're not anyway. But you can see, you can see how that might affect. Well, it might. Say there was a consecutive corner afterwards, you then carry more speed into the next corner, and so on and so on. Let's just take a quick look. The bus stop is an area of particular variance, because as you can see here, apparently our newer version is slower by a huge amount, but the bus stop is a really mechanically dependent corner, so it's not really suited to this kind of thing. But as you can see, through the carousel we had higher exit speed with a higher brake. I mean, the numbers we're playing with here are so small that it makes it really hard to judge. I'm just trying to find any other points on the track which sort of show this off. I mean, off the final corner we're basically doing the same speed. And off the first turn I was actually slightly quicker with less rake, but again, because of the small speed differences, a lot of this could actually just be me driving it, which is why a lateral G indicator is also helpful. But either way, you can see that yes, the back of the car is definitely running higher now. It's definitely affecting our straight line speed. That's a certain. And what you're trying to do here is, I suggest that you play around with the amount of rake in the car to find the effective sweet spot, because there'll be a point where you can get the rake to a certain level which is giving you good downforce in the turns, but it's not killing your straight line speed too much. So what I'm hoping to do now is, I'm hoping if we now go back to iRacing and I now run a huge amount of rake in the car. Well, I say a huge amount, I'm going to increase it by another 5. Okay, so as we can see, the camber's gone to 1.6 again. The toe has increased very slightly up to 0.9, but if I change that, it'll drop it. Actually, let's just quickly save this here. Let's again save this baseline 3. Right, okay, so let's check what the original baseline was. So the original baseline was 0.1, so it did actually change, it's just the garage screen is being slow to respond. Okay, so let's drop that back down to, because I don't want to go too, I don't want to go that side, because that's going to put me in the negative. So if I go down to 0.4, and I've forgotten what my rear camber was, so let's just check. Okay, so 1722 10.5. Okay. So I need to touch a tiny bit more camber in. And again, the front's too high, so we're going to have to drop that down. It's probably as low as we can get with that. You see again, the rear toe went up again. It's going to get really annoying. As you can see, the front toe's gone up as well. Now we need to get the caster back up and the camber back down and so on. We're going to end up chasing it around in a circle again. Or are we? Have we actually managed? Okay, the toe's the wrong side. Okay, I think I managed to actually get what I want, which is quite amazing. Yep, indeed we have. Okay, so I'm just going to save that quickly as baseline 3, so I can get back to it. Okay, so I just forgot to say what I'd changed it to. Right, so okay, we now got 18mm of rake in the car. What I'm also going to do is I'll also upload, well, not upload, but I'll link to a couple of things in the description with regards to simplified explanations of these, along with a couple of diagrams and so on, which should hopefully give you guys a better understanding of it. Okay, so what am I expecting by placing the rear higher now? Okay, well, first off, what I'm expecting is I'm certainly expecting to now have less mechanical grip at the rear of the car. So I'm expecting more oversteer, especially in slow speed corners, especially getting back into the throttle. Didn't go down enough gears there. I'm also expecting to be even slower down the straights now. It certainly feels more on edge. That's an absolute definite. I mean, you can even see through that we're having some interesting moments in. Yeah, and that's cost us a lot of time there because we're scrubbing the tyres across the track and losing speed. Now, the amount of rake that you can crank into a car really has a lot of dependency upon the car itself. Some cars you'll get away with a lot of rake, and other cars you won't get away with anywhere near as much. I'm afraid I can't give any examples off the top of my head. I know I'll probably run about 25 to 30mm rake in the Daytona prototype sometimes. One car which I know has a hell of a lot of rake in to start with is the Audi R8. That was a comment that we made as soon as we saw the garage screen. We went, okay, so the rear is much higher than the front. Like I think it's a huge amount. It's like it's over 50mm. I'm sure on the baseline set. Also, if you guys noticed there, I just lost a lot of time through that S again. So we've probably gone too far on rake here. I quite liked how the car was handling before though, so I think at the end of this 3-lapper we'll go back to that for any further things that we want to do. Yeah, as you can see, it's just way too aggressive. Is probably the best word. Like it really bites into the turn, which can be kind of nice depending on what kind of driver you are. But it's a trait that's probably not going to win you any favours in any long distance races. As you go marginally faster on this lap, which I find intriguing because I've really not been liking how the car's been handling. Definitely seems like one of those setups where a better driver than I could probably actually make this work. but for me it's definitely got too much rotation on entry. Now I could probably cure that if I played around with the caster again. Normally what I would do if I had too much rotation on entry is I would look at either reducing the rear ride height, or I would reduce the caster. Or alternatively, if it was on the brakes, I would move the brake bias forwards. And I realised I've actually just gone way too long. I should have pulled up some distance ago. Okay, let's just have a quick look at laps here. Yeah, so wasn't really that happy with that, but I'll just show you guys, just to clarify. Okay, so we're back in MoTeC now. Now we've got our new lap. Now can I get a third overlay of that? No, apparently not. That's a shame. Okay, so if we go back to our very original one, which was the car with 3mm of rake, we can now see that we've got 13, which is pretty much in line with what's expected. If we had 3, if we don't change the spring rates and we go from having 3. If we go from having 8mm static, this is the other important thing that I haven't actually mentioned yet, and I really should have done. In the garage screen, the static rake with the first setup was 8mm. Now, when you're out on track and you've got the aero load and you've got the fact you're accelerating down the straight, the dynamic rake obviously reduces, and this is what you're really looking at. You're really looking at what the dynamic rake is. The static rake's important because it determines the dynamic rate, but it isn't the only component of the dynamic rake. And I'm going to explain that in a second with regards to spring rates. But essentially what you can see here is that we had, with the original one where we had 8mm static, that gave us 3mm dynamic at the end of the straight. Now with our most recent one we had 13mm static, and that's giving us no, we didn't have 13, did we? Have more than that. We had 18, so that's now giving us 13. So that makes sense, obviously, because we increased the static by 10, so we got a 10 difference dynamic because we kept with the same springs. And over the other one, it would like if we just quickly check out what the other one was. Yeah, okay, the other one was 13mm static and is now 8mm dynamic. So we're expecting that. But what I'm gonna do is I'm now going to take off the overlay for a second. I really wasn't happy with how that car handled, but let's just compare. Let's go from, to give you an idea of the biggest extremes. We're gonna show you the original setup along with the crazy one, as I would call it. Okay, so if we take this position on the straight, we can see that with the crazy rake, the most rake even, we have 252 km/h top speed versus 254. It's kind of in line and kind of makes sense in the sense that we lost 1 kilometer when we went 5 mil more. We've lost another kilometer when we've gone another 5mm more. But in fairness, I think some of that was actually coming from having having the rear unsettle in the S's near the start of the lap. But anyway, let's just take a quick look at what our cornering speeds were. Now, I wasn't really that confident in the car here, so the cornering speeds actually seem like they're kind of similar. Like if we look at the point at which I got back up, like I'm still definitely getting on the throttle earlier when we have more rake in the car, as you can see from the throttle position again in the top corner here. But the difference this time is that as expected, the exit speed is almost the same, and because of the increased rake, we're now definitely losing out down the straight. Like if we go to the corner, we can see we're 1 kilometer behind here. Interesting thing is that we actually get on the brakes later. So I was braking later with more rake. but the lap times are pretty similar, and definitely the 18mm static, 13mm dynamic rake wasn't something I enjoyed. I wasn't really a fan of that at all. I did like the second setup though, so I'm gonna go back to that for the next couple of comparisons I do. Okay, so if we now go into load up the baseline 2, which was the 13mm static, 8mm dynamic. I'm just going to run a couple of laps with this again, just real quick here, and I'm going to tell you what I expect, what I'm going to try next. Okay, so essentially what I'm doing here is I'm just getting myself a baseline again. I know I already have one, but I'd like to get another one. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try the other spring sets out, and I'm going to set the ride heights the same, and we're going to see what difference that has on the dynamic rake, because as I already said, the static rake is meaningless if the dynamic rake... Well, the static rake isn't meaningless, but it is. It determines a function of the dynamic rake, but it's also heavily dependent upon the springs you have in the car. Now, we are running spring set 2 here, which has the stiffer rear spring compared with the softer front. I think they're 250mm in the rear, 250 newtons per millimeter in the rear and 225s in the front. As usual, we are taking up a lot of time here, but it does require, I think, a visual aid in order to understand the adjustments I'm making and why. And I do apologise if my explanations can be a bit, well, they're not necessarily always concise. So if you do have any comments and regards as to if you would like any further explanations on things, I'll be trying to cover those in the tech tips videos that'll be coming up shortly. There'll also be another video as well that's going to be coming out, and that's going to be again another Mercedes setup video at VIR. And that's in order to create a setup for the upcoming DGFX race that'll be there. Be an interesting focus from that setup as well, though, because I'll be really focusing on drivability rather than straight out and out performance. Once again, not really an amazing set of laps coming out here, but the times are looking pretty good for how I feel I'm driving. Like, I was really unhappy with the second to last corner on that last lap. Like, I really gave up a lot of time on the exit. I also may consider doing some track guides at some point. but that's likely to be a good while into the future, I think. Okay, I was reasonably happy with that lap, and I'm going to be rewarded with a 109 here. Ooh. Interesting oversteer moment there. Okay, so if you just take a quick look at laps, that was probably a better representation of where the car is, and I'm getting more consistent the more laps I do. Okay, so I'll just hop out really quickly here. Sorry about that noise that probably just came up. That's just me switching the scene there. Okay, so again we're back with what we had before with the 8mm rake. Okay, so this is as previously said with spring set 2. What I'll be doing now is I'm only going to do some really short 1-lap runs here because that's all that's necessary. So if I go to right, okay, so spring set 2, 225s at the front, 250s at the rear. So if we go to spring set 1, that puts 275s at the front and 250s at the rear. It's also basically junked our ride heights. So let's just make a quick note of those. 95 and 82. Okay, so the rears didn't change a great deal, but the front definitely did. And the reason the rear didn't change a great deal was because the rear actually didn't change at all. It was only the front springs that changed. But because of that change at the front of the car, that obviously changed the rear of the car as well. What we can also see is that the stiffer spring, because it's not compressing as much, we now need to reset the ride height, so we need to go for some more spring perch offset. Can we get one? No, we can't get one more. That's a shame. Okay, so rear's the same. Front's close enough to what we had before, so we'll just go with that. This will only be some really quick one lap should be enough to show the difference that I'm hoping to show. But I might do 3 depending on how the car's feeling. What I'm expecting here is I'm expecting more support from the front because I've got a stiffer spring in, but I'm also expecting more understeer because we're going to have less grip. But it is going to be more responsive as well. It was actually quite good through the carousel there. Now, one interesting thing to mention here is that say you did want to undertake a spring change. Now you have to be aware of how that's going to affect your anti-roll bar setting, because what happens is whilst the anti-roll bar doesn't affect any pure compression, say under braking of the car, like because of how the anti-roll bar is configured, it won't make any difference, because if both sides of the car compress at the same rate and they compress the same distance, then therefore there is no change and no twist induced into the anti-roll bar. But in the corners, because the left side's going to compress more than the right, it's that difference that loads up the anti-roll bar and induces the twist, which the anti-roll bar then tries to resist. But because the coil spring is still active in that situation, what's important to note is that your roll stiffness is a function of the anti-roll bar plus the coil spring. So if you increase your front coil springs but you wish to maintain the same mid-corner attitude, then you will want to reduce your front anti-roll bar, and that will bring you back to the same to the same front roll stiffness. Now the tricky part of that is that because you don't actually have any physical dimensions to work off and to calculate back what your roll stiffness would be, is you do have to wing it just based on some trial and error. But it can be done. So if you did decide you wanted more front support on the brakes, then you could go to a stiffer front spring and reduce the anti-roll bar until you got back the similar mid-corner balance. And that's the other thing. That's the other important thing to note. An anti-roll bar is only effective. Well, I say it's only effective. It's most effective in a corner like this, in the middle of the corner where the car's closest approximately to steady state cornering. And what I mean by that is, I mean that the car has as close as can be expected from a race car, a constant velocity as it's going around the turn. It's pretty much the center of the turn is where we're talking about here, and that's where the left side is going to be lower than the right and inducing that twist, and where that difference in left and right side heights is going to be at its highest. The reason why it's not as effective on entry is because it takes time for the body to roll and induce that twist. So if there's no displacement difference between the left and right sides, there can be no twist in the bar, and therefore the bar doesn't have any effect. It's also why I'm quite an advocate of real suspension geometries which try their best to separate out the compression, well, the pitch modes and the roll modes, because then that way you can have a pure compression spring and a pure roll spring, and they don't conflict with each other, or the conflict is minimal. For example, some monoshock configurations pretty much achieve this, because they'll have a monoshock and then a monoshock coilover with a anti-roll bar, and basically if both front wheels compress then the monoshock compresses, but if only one compresses then the anti-roll bar will be loaded up and will provide the resistance. And I realised I should have stopped again. Car actually drove pretty good there. Let's have a quick look at the laps. Yeah, I mean we were turning some decent times there, comparable to the previous set. We definitely had some more understeer in the middle of the carousel. But I mean it was okay. That wasn't really what I was trying to show you. What I was trying to show you is the difference in the dynamic rake. So what we had there was we had same rear spring, stiffer front spring. So what that means is that the front should be compressing less on the straights and the rear compressing more relatively. So I'm believing what I should see here is a reduction in rake. I hope so, otherwise I'm going to look quite stupid. Okay, so this is our original run. Yay! And this is our new run. As you can see, the difference is quite small, but it definitely is there. I mean, let's just quickly change the scale on this here. Let's go to 30 and let's reduce that to a -10. Yeah, so as you can see here, in fact, let's filter that a bit more as well. We're going to just quickly smooth by samples here. Okay, so as you can see by smoothing by samples, our pink line here is. Oh, actually, I've just realised I'm not showing you the MoTeC. Okay, so here's the MoTeC, and here was what I'm talking about. what you can see here on the rake screen again is the pink line is our original, which was with the 225 front springs and 250 rear springs, and then this overlaid black line is our 275 front spring and our 250 rear spring. So as expected, what you can see is that the rake is less because the front of the car has compressed less, but the rear has probably compressed the same amount. So what this does is obviously this flattens the car out more. So you can see that this has changed. Despite our static rake being the same, our dynamic rake has changed. It's not a huge difference in this case, but it could be a huge difference if you'd have gone a wildly different spring rate. So if we go to the end of the straight again, we'll be able to see. Yeah, okay, so the difference was basically minimal in terms of speed. Strangely enough, actually, our version where we had more rake in the car was actually faster, but I think that was entirely down to the exit speed I got. But you can see that the difference in rake here was approximately about half to 1 millimeters from these two numbers here. And let's just take a quick look at how that changed our. Okay, so if you just quickly look at the throttle position here, this kind of illustrates how we've induced more understeer into the car, because I was only getting back to full throttle. Like I mean that's really clear actually. You can see that from the variant where we had the softer front springs, I was back into the throttle well before I was on the stiffer front spring, and that's because the new setup has a lot more front stiffness, which is creating more understeer. So if we look at what our exit speeds from the corner were, we're actually basically the same, very slightly quicker with the previous setup. Okay, so that's kind of illustrating what I was meaning to get across there with regards to a change in rake, a change in dynamic rake due to your spring rates. Now you can make that a much more exaggerated difference if you were to take a car which has many more spring options, and you'd be able to see how that changes. But it's an important thing to note that if you do change your spring rates, you have to go back and check both what your static rake is and what your dynamic rake is. So say if you fit a softer rear spring, what you'll want to do to maintain the same dynamic rake is you'll want to run higher static rake so that the back is basically squashed down to the same level. Like I know that one of my teammates, Sai used to say that the Star Mazda, I think it was the Star Mazda, was extremely sensitive to rake. So that's a car where that would be really important. Okay, so I'm just gonna go to what I think is effectively going to be our last thing here, and that's going to be the dampers. Now this really requires as much data as you can gather, because that gives you the biggest sort of spread, and it will filter out. It won't filter, but it'll smooth any inconsistencies. And I can actually show you a good example of this here. So if I go back to our original 10-lap run that we did, then if at the top of the screen, okay, so we'll go to damper histograms. We'll turn off the overlaid one because that's just screwing everything up. Okay, so this is effectively the damper histograms, and what this is showing you is it shows you both the average shock speed in both bump and rebound, and it shows you where the shock is spending most of its time. Effectively, a higher level of one of these peaks indicates that the shock is spending more time in that. Now the middle is effectively zero speed, which sounds kind of odd, but you would normally expect the middle to have, because the damper has to cross the middle more normally. you would expect to spend most time around that point. So what we can see here is, because this is only a single lap, there can be huge jumps in the data and huge inconsistencies. It's illustrated here. Now, if I drag the top of the MoTeC workbook here, so that includes more, you see they change, and they normally will start to produce things closer and closer to actual curves. Well, smooth curves, I should say. I'm just trying to do this pretty slowly so that you guys can see how the data develops as it goes. What's important here is that you use the main body of the run, but not the out and the in laps. And the reason you don't want to use your out and your in laps is because let's just take a quick look at the out lap here. Now, the out lap's going to show a lot of slow movement because when you're coming out of the pits, and the in lap the same. There you go. That's really very clear, and that's because the in lap was, one, very short because I stopped out on track, and two, because it took me some time to escape out of the car, and it obviously kept logging data as that was happening. So that's why you don't want to use those laps, because they're pure anomalies. So let's go back to the main body of the run. Okay, so what are these things actually showing you? Well, as I've already said, they're showing you effectively where the shock spends its most time. And the way I have it set up is I have it so the left side of the center line is the rebound of the shock, as to when the shock is, once the shock's been compressed, this is when the shock is coming back out of the body. So the wheel is dropping down into the track. And bump is the opposite, so where you run over a road irregularity like a curb, and this is where the shock's being compressed up towards the body of the car. And we can also see that we have, as previously mentioned, we have the average speeds and whatnot. Now, there is some discussion as with regards to what average speeds you should aim for. I personally don't think that that's relevant. And the reason I don't think that's relevant is because unless you're always running at very similar tracks, you will see a huge range in average speeds. And a good example of this would be somewhere like Lime Rock Park versus Monza. And the reason why this would show you such a huge difference is because Monza is predominantly straights and it's very flat, whereas Lime Rock Park is pretty much one continuous corner. And it's very bumpy. And what you'll find at Lime Rock Park is you will find that the shock will spend a lot more time in the high speed bump and rebound sectors than it will in the low speed. And well, I say that, but essentially the shock average velocities will be a lot higher because they're spending more, well, they will spend more time in those high speed sectors, like most probably, unless you went with very aggressive low speed damping. But then conversely, at Monza, you're going to be on the straights a lot. And if you're on the straights and you're going in a straight line, the car's going to be in steady state pretty much for a long time. You're going to be in the low speed area of the shock if you're moving at all. And you're not going to spend a lot of time in the high speed. You'll hit the high speed when you hit the curbs, but otherwise, you're not going to be running over so many bumps. And the next thing to differentiate is the difference between low and high speed. Now, the definition of this is, there's various ones I've seen thrown around. I personally use, I think, about 25 millimeters a second as my cutoff. Anything below that is considered low speed, anything above that is considered high speed. But I have seen some very different interpretations of this. The honest answer is I'm not entirely certain as to what the best answer is. I'm pretty certain it depends upon what your conditions are and what environments you're operating in. But anyway, essentially the difference between low speed and high speed. Low speed is all about the controlling basically the body movements of the car. So this is going to be about corner entry as the body's starting to roll over, and you've got you're inducing a velocity during the shocks are used between, if for a smooth corner the shocks are only active between the initial movement of the steering wheel or the brakes or the application of the throttle and the point at which you basically level out the controls. So the carousel is a good example of this, because the point at which the shock is active is as soon as you start turning the wheel into the corner, and then as soon as you reach the point where you reach a constant steering angle and a constant throttle input, or a constant speed is a more appropriate term, then at that point the shock isn't moving anymore, or it shouldn't be, because the body should have reached a steady state point. And the shock, because it's a velocity based device, it can't physically exert it exerts its force when there's velocity, not when there's a displacement. I mean, you can take a shock, you can displace it 25 mil, but once it's at 25 mil, it's not going to try and it won't be trying to exert a force back on you. But if you try and compress it really fast with your hands, then it will exert a lot of force, and it'll be quite difficult to do. Now, that's really where low speed is working, because that's the body roll and the body movement of the car. And that's what the low speed's all about. The low speed's about controlling those movements. The high speed is about bumps, curbs, this kind of thing. I personally find the low speed is easier to tune. And the reason why the low speed is easier to tune is because it's easier to understand its effects. From reading around and my current understanding, high speed seems to be a lot harder to set, because high speed seems to be basically determined on, you increase it, you see what happens, then you decrease it, you see what happens, and from that you decide which way you kind of want to go. Whereas low speed is more direct than that. If you think the body rolls way too quickly into the corner and you lose traction and the car gets away from you, then you want to slow down that movement and you want to increase the low speed bump. And that's reasonably logical, whereas the high speed's still logical, but it's less so, because it's more dependent upon what kind of bumps and things you're hitting. But anyway, back to these histograms. Now, a reasonable, what you're really looking for here is you're really looking to make sure the dampers are actually working the way you want them to work. And what I mean by this is the low speed should always have more movement than the high speed regions. So these are, the left side ones are closer to a sort of idealized shape, in the sense of they increase slowly until they reach the middle, where they reach the peak, and then they come back down the other side. What you don't want to see is, you don't want to see sort of a bimodal distribution where you've got two peaks in your graph. Say you've got like a peak here, and then you've got a peak over here, and a big dip in the middle. That's bad. That's not what you want. That's not how your shocks aren't really working how you want them to. This is closer to what you want. And then you've also got the skewness of the data. So the right sides, you can see that quite clearly. They spend a lot more time in the low speed rebound than they do in the low speed bump. They spend 4.6% more time in that region. That's quite a big difference, actually. Now, what I will initially try to do is I will initially try to match on a single damper. I will try to match the average speeds and the low and the high speed, the time they spend in low and high speed. So this left side one's got 26.6 in the low speed rebound, 26.2 in the low speed bump, 23.2 in the high speed, 24.1 in the high speed on the rebound. The difference in average velocity is that basically it moves faster in bump, and it moves faster in bump compared to how it moves in rebound. So it's moving a bit quicker. It's moving about 1.5 millimeters faster per second. So if I want to slow down that speed in the bump, what I will do initially is I think looking at the difference between the high speed 24.1 and 23.2, I think what I will do is I will initially try a fraction more low speed bump and a fraction more high speed bump at the same time. Now, over on this side, we can see that we're spending a lot of time in low speed rebound, compared with basically every other bin. So what I would actually be tempted to do on that shock is I would be tempted to speed it up a little bit by reducing the amount of low speed rebound I have. Now this is going to be really, really difficult for me to actually show you guys, because as I've already explained, this takes a lot of data to actually get right. Because if we go back to looking at lap 6, you can see that it kind of has the same distributions and whatnot, but it's going to be difficult for us to show over a single lap. I mean, even if we look at over 3 lap runs here, you can see that our 3 lap runs are really not great in terms of data, and the data is quite wildly different. So it's going to be hard for me to show you that. In which case, what I might do is I might over exaggerate the effects real quick. Like if we go and look very quickly at this, I believe this section of data here. If we look quickly at between 1 and 3. Now, as I've already said, you really, really want more data than this, because 3 laps is not really enough. So the one that's going to be easiest for me to show you a difference on here is going to be this right front. And I'm continuing the same color code as before. So left side's lilac, right side's red, and the tops are the fronts, the bottoms are the rear. I've also heard a couple of ideas from people with regards to how they would set them up, and I wouldn't necessarily say they're wrong, but I would say that there is some notable things that you want to make sure of before you go about those methods. One method that I was told about was people setting it so that the average front velocities of their shocks were almost the same or equal to their average rear shock velocities, in order so that basically when the weight transferred forwards and weight transferred rearwards, you got a similar response. And that kind of makes sense to me in my head, and I think that works, but that works for a very specific user case, and it's difficult to take that completely as it is in iRacing, because we don't know enough about the cars. And what I mean by this is I mean that you're assuming that both the front and the rear shocks have the same motion ratios. And what I mean by this is, I mean the motion ratio is effectively how much the shock moves relative to how much the wheel moves up. Now, if you're assuming that they both have the same, then matching the speeds will work the same way, because the speed is just the derivative of the displacement. Now, if the motion ratios are different, say the front wheel moves 10 millimeters and that moves the shock 10 millimeters, but the rear wheel moves 10 millimeters and that moves the rear shock 5 millimeters, then your derivatives are obviously going to give different speeds. The rear shocks are going to be moving slower. So you can't then match those speeds, because you'll end up with wildly different handling. Because it's not really important. It's important how the shock moves for the shock's own performance, but in terms of what it's doing for the car balance, it's more important how the tire, well, I say the tire, how the wheel and the tire and that whole assembly is moving. So what I instead try to do is I just instead try to match the rebound and the bump average speeds, and I basically try and get these to be perfect normal distribution curves to start with. Now, you should be noted that that's not always the best way. I've noticed on the Daytona prototypes that I will have the graph slightly skewed. I think I have it skewed slightly to rebound, but I can't be entirely certain, especially at the fronts. I know the fronts I definitely have them skewed, and that seems to give better response. But a good benchmark to start with is try and get all these bins to equal 25, 25, 25, 25. And match the average for the individual shocks, because once you have that, then you can start tuning from that point. So let's just have a quick look at this, and we'll try and make some right front adjustments and see if we can just change this peak here. We'll do 3 lap runs again, okay? So we think we're spending too much, well, we think we're not spending enough time in low speed bump compared to how much time we're spending in high speed rebound. So what we'll, well, not high speed rebound, sorry, low speed rebound. So what we'll do is we'll add, well, I'm happy with the 25% in the low speed bump. So instead what I'll do is I'll just reduce some low speed rebound, and that should move the shock close to the high speed region, and that should speed the shock up a bit, a little bit. Okay, so just look at this front shock and there's low speed rebound I said. So let's take a wild swing at it, because a wild swing's gonna be more obvious to you guys than subtle movements, and that's what I'm trying to show you here. I'm sorry that this segment's taken quite a bit of explaining and quite a lot of time, but that's really what's important here. Actually, I just need to be quick sure that I actually changed back to iRacing there. Nope, I didn't. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go back to iRacing and show you that change I made there. Apologies for that, guys. Okay, so if we just go in here quickly, what I did was my low speed rebound was 5 and 5. These were the default settings, by the way. So I'm going to reduce my low speed down to 2, because that's just a big swing. We're just going to show you what's going to happen here. Okay, so once again we're logging some data. Now it's important also to go on how the car feels rather than just purely on what the data says, because you can have them be perfectly distributed across the curve and the car can handle absolutely terribly. Which probably makes you wonder what the point of doing this is. But there is a point. But this is also why this is the last adjustment I make to a car. Which is also why this video will stop pretty much at the conclusion of this segment. The other thing I'd like to note about the shocks is, if you're ever driving a car and that has that really horrible sort of crazy bunny hopping effect, then the shocks is normally the adjustment that can fix that, or at least go as much as it can about mitigating it. I know cars that really struggle with this at the roughs, they really struggle. The V8 supercars used to, but I haven't driven those in a while, so I can't really comment. Pretty good time, but I'm not gonna attribute that all down to one shock adjustment, because that's definitely not what it would be. Although the shocks are definitely something I'd go to if I'm struggling with a drivability problem. The other thing I would say is don't be afraid to have asymmetric car setups. Because most tracks will have a degree of asymmetry to them. And you definitely can gain from accepting that and working towards it. It's a shame to make that mistake in that last turn, so that was going to be quicker again. So actually a really good set of laps there. Okay, so again, I was happy with the car I was driving there. And actually I think that was probably, yeah, that was definitely my best set of laps in the whole time we've been doing this. But I really am not going to attribute that all the way down to that shock adjustment, because it definitely wouldn't have made that much of a difference. But we're gonna go and look at the data anyway. Again, sorry for that noise there. Okay, so that's actually pretty handy. It's worked out exactly as I was hoping it would do. Well, okay, so what we can see here is we've pulled up the average speed of that shock by reducing the amount of time it spends in the low speed rebound, because it's now transferred a little bit of that over the low speed bump, and I believe some of the high speed rebound. But let's just take a quick look, because this is the first set of data that we were originally working with. So as you can see, it was 30% low speed, 31.84 on the average, 22.9 on the high speed, 24.9 on the low speed bump. Now if we can move over to what we've just adjusted to, you can see that yes, we definitely have now got more low speed bump in terms of the shock spending more time in low speed bump relatively over its movement, and it's spending less in low speed rebound. It's still probably got a fraction too much, but we've pulled up that average shock speed massively there, and we've got much closer to matching them either side. Now there is a lot more to it than just that, so I will recover this in a future video, but I think the difference there that I've shown is already enough to give you an idea as to what kind of adjustments you need to make and how you would go about doing that. Now the best thing I can say with this is you want to make adjustments large enough that you can see in these histograms to start with anyway. You can start making finer adjustments afterwards, but to begin with you definitely want to spend time making large adjustments so you can see the effects that these large adjustments have. Because if you make small adjustments, and especially if you use a small data sample like we've been using here, it can be difficult to tell what effect that change that you've performed has actually had. Okay, well I think we'll just take just a very quick look at the effects of the bump stops. Oh, okay, maybe we won't. There we go. Alright, I'm just still getting the hang of OBS here and how all that works. Right. Okay, so if we just go quickly into the garage, you can see that. Remember in the last video I talked about this option of this weird option of having bump rubbers or no bump rubbers. Now, I haven't actually driven the car with none on, but essentially their purpose is there to limit the travel of the suspension, so that in real life that basically the shock doesn't smash into the internals of the piston doesn't smash into the top of the shock internally, and basically damage the shock. Now, the reason why the bump rubbers are important to consider in the setup is it's important to consider if you're actually hitting them. And it's important to consider if you're hitting them for the following reason. If we go back out again, and we just have a quick look here at back at the desktop. Now, if we just have a quick look at this spring, this example spreadsheet showing what we've got here is I've effectively taken the 225 Newton per millimeter spring and I've just plotted it. Now, what you'll find is that no coil spring, even if they're supposed linear coil springs, will actually be linear. And the reason for that is because there's coils in them, as you compress them up, the number of active coils will reduce and the rate will effectively increase. There is the only way you could get around that is to effectively, well, you'd have to kind of wait. No, it still wouldn't work. I was going to say you could wind your spring in a digressive manner, but that wouldn't work because the softer springs, the softer coils, as it were, would compress first, and then you'd hit the tighter wound springs afterwards. No, the other way around. Sorry. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Might be wrong there. But effectively, I don't think a spring that was wound that way would work. You'd just compress the softer coils first, and then you'd be onto a stiffer spring by the end. But essentially what I'm trying to say here is that with regards to this, you can approximate them to be reasonably linear. Now, the bump stops, what we have plotted here is we have the 225 plotted as pretty much a straight line, and then what we've got here is we've got, this is actually some real data, and it is related to short track oval cars in terms of it's a bump stop that's been characterized by applying a known load to it and then measuring well, it was actually deflected a certain amount, and then the load it was taken to deflect was found by plotting against that. But what we can see here is the black line represents the coil spring, the red line represents the bump stop. Now, the black line is relatively linear, whereas the red line starts off slightly progressive and then becomes aggressively progressive towards the end of its travel. And this is why it's important to know if you're actually riding on the bump stops or not, and where the adjustment of those, if you have those bump springs, not bump springs, sorry, if you have those bump rubbers in the car or not, is worth considering their effects. Now, a car where this is definitely something which can be adjusted to a reasonably noticeable degree is, if you notice the GT3 and the Cup versions of the Rough, they both have bump stop gaps which you can set, and essentially this is how much you can compress the mainsprings before you hit the bump stops. Now, these bump stops will, because they're effectively applying, well, they're effectively adding to the original stiffness. What they'll bring about is a quite abrupt, for the deflection that they have, increase in spring stiffness at whatever axle that you'll be on there. So it's I can kind of see why you might want to take those bump rubbers out on the Mercedes, but I haven't done it, and I'm also hesitant. No, I would be hesitant to do it in real life for fear of destroying the shocks. But yeah, that's maybe a reason why you'd want to do it, in case it landed on them, in case it lands onto the bump rubber and that gets added to that. It effectively increases the spring rate on that axle or that corner of the car, and quite aggressively, as you can see here. It goes from pretty much a reasonable increase of like 8 newtons per millimeter, and then it ramps up after about an inch and a half's worth of travel. Well, 1.75 inches worth of travel. It ramps up to over 10 times that, which will be a considerable increase in stiffness. Now, actually, you know what? We'll just give that a quick go and see what difference that does make on the car. But this was just really to illustrate to you what the bump stop is actually doing, if the car hits the bump stop. Okay, so if we're back in the garage here, and we've got 82mm on the front, 95 on the rear. So let's just take the bump rubbers out of both axles, just to see what happens. Now, that's quite impressive how much of a difference that makes to those ride heights, especially the front. The front's practically like on the floor. So we're going to have to make a huge change here with regards to our ride heights to get back to where we were at. We might not actually even be able to get back to where we were at. Let's take all the spring perch offset out and let's see where we are. Yeah, I mean, hopefully raising the back's gonna... Yeah, raising the back's got us back to where we want to be. Or it's going to anyway. Okay, so let's just set the front back to 82, I believe it was. Okay, so if the front's down at 82, and I believe this was a 13mm rake in the car statically, so we should be 95 at the rears. Okay, so we appear to have crossweight in the car, which is intriguing. Okay, let's just get all the spring perches set to be the same to start with, because otherwise... Okay, there we go. We're back to where we want to be. We can't go that low on that. Although we might be if we... No. Okay. So we're back to 50-50. We've got 0.4, 0.7, 17, 17. Okay, so nothing else has changed. Everything else is going to be the same. I'm intrigued as to what's going to happen here. I'm not expecting any difference at all in these kind of segments because the car won't or shouldn't be on the bump stops. But the place where we're probably going to see a difference, if there is indeed a difference, is going to be in the bus stop here. I mean, the critical bit of information that we're not actually told with this is we're not actually told how long these bump stops are. So it's quite difficult for us to ascertain when the car's actually going to be hitting them. I'm quite confused as to why taking them out actually changes the... it drops the spring down though. Because that somewhat implies that the car was already riding on those. which it definitely shouldn't have been, not at static anyway. And if it was, the spring rate change wouldn't make as big a difference as it does. The car certainly drives interestingly through that corner. Feels like there's more roll in the back. Definitely seems to be more roll oversteer in the rear of the car. It's tougher to drive for sure, but I'm a little bit at a loss to explain why, unless the rear actually was landing on the bump rubbers. Also, I think we're going slightly quicker down the straights. Well, the laps were pretty slow, but that's because the handling, especially the rear of the car, was quite unpredictable. But I'm curious as to where these bump rubbers are actually located in the coilover assembly. I think we're using the rear tyres a bit more. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at if there's any changes specifically in Rake I'm intrigued by. Okay, so this is where we were at for the fast lap. And coming down, let's just load in that last. Okay. So this is the fast one, and this is the one we've just done. Okay, so the Rake is considerably more actually. It's about at least a 1.5 millimeter change there, which is interesting, and especially here's really intriguing. There's a big change in Rake here. I'm not really sure why that would be. I think if I'm honest, to give you an accurate assessment of what's going on here, I'm gonna have to look into this a bit more and have a bit more of a think about it. Let's just have a quick look at another channel I have set up, roll angle. Okay, So what I have here is essentially I've estimated how wide the axles are effectively at the front, and by this I mean the center distances of the. If you look at the car from the front, I've estimated how basically the middle of each tire to the opposite side of the car, and then I've pretty much applied a function based on the difference in ride heights to calculate out what the angle is. Now, intriguingly enough, we can see that when we don't have those bump rubbers in, there is a definite difference in terms of roll angle at both the front and the rear of the car. Now, that does suggest that the car was actually riding on those bump rubbers at times in the turns. But curiously, I'm going to have to look at that more to really come to a good conclusion on that. But I think this pretty much wraps it up for this. We've gone on for quite some time now, and what I would like to say is if you have actually lasted this long, and I believe it's been 2 hours. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, message me on the forums, and so on. And likewise, if you have any criticisms of how I do things, because I imagine it probably takes quite a while to get to an answer, and that probably is quite frustrating. So I'll be trying to address those kind of issues in the tech tips videos that'll be coming up. And they should sort of run through things much quicker. But I'll leave that as it is for now, and yeah, I hope that's helped you guys out.